As we come to closure of Chapter 7, we now bring pretty much all that we've learned so far in our course to solving quadratic equations, and we're going to use this technique of factoring. So these are our objectives, quadratic equations by factoring. And then once we get the solutions, how do we make an equation out of it? That'll be our last topic of Chapter 7 before our test. Now we had said earlier that this part before the equal sign was the quadratic expression. Now we're adding a 0 to it. An equal sign and a 0. This makes it a quadratic equation. So there is a set of recipes for solving quadratic equations, and the technique we're going to use is factoring. Now, how does this work? Well, let's give you a little bit of background on this. That if we have A times B, and again, this is a factor times a factor, and if these factors equal 0, the only way this could be true is that A as a factor would have to be a 0, because 0 times B would be 0, or B is equal to a 0, A times 0 is 0, or they're both equal to 0. 0 times 0 is 0. And that's what they're illustrating here. So as we move on, we see now we have two binomial factors that are equal to 0. So in a sense, this is our A times B equals 0. Now, the protocol, the way I want you to show this on your blue sheet, is take each of the factors and equal them to 0. So we're saying that A would have to be 0. So we go x minus 5 equals 0. And then we write the or. 2x minus 7, which is our B in a sense, equals 0. So we've equated each of the factors equal to 0. And now we have these little mini equations, and we just solve them. This is just going to be x transpose that is 5. We haven't used that word for a while. And then 2x equals, transpose the negative 7, becomes a 7 on this side. And then we get, this is a solution here. Here we have to divide by 2, and we have x equals 7/2. So this was already in factored form, equal to 0. So we take each of our factors, equal it to 0, and there is our solution. Now, the last part of this section, we're going to give you the answers. We want you to make the equation, the original equation. So what you do is you sort of work backwards. Bring the 5 over to the other side, equal it to 0. Then you're going to put that in its factored form. And then we'd have to FOIL here to get the trinomial that this originally was. Okay, our first one there. Now, when we give our solution set to it, it's often we write it in roster notation, braces, and they'll usually give you that as part of the answer. You just have to put in your two roots, as they're called, or solutions, separated by a comma. Now, if we put a 5 in there, this is going to be 5 minus 5 is 0. 0 times this is 0. And if we put in a 7/2 there, this becomes 7 minus 7 is 0. So it checks out. They're giving quite an extensive proof here. Okay. Now, we want to solve a quadratic equation by factoring, I should say. Graphing comes a lot later. Okay, so there we have this. Now, is this in standard form? And the answer is no. So the first thing you have to do is put it in standard form. 3x squared. Transpose the 6 to the other side, where it becomes a negative 6x. And this equals 0. Now so when we factor this, take out our 3x from each term, going back to an earlier lesson, we end up with 3x, this equals 0. Now, in a sense, we're using this a times b equals 0. But now, this is sort of our a term here, and in parentheses, this is our b term, that equals 0. So the rule, and this is what we want you to write in your notes and later on your blue sheet, that we're going to equate each of these values, the a and the b, equal it to 0. So we have 3x equals 0, or x minus 2 equals 0. So here we're just going to divide both sides by 3, and we get x equals 0. And here we just transpose the negative 2, and we get x equals 2. Now, let's just see if those, in fact, make this true. If x is 0 here, x squared is 0 times 0 is 0 times 3 is 0. And 6 times 0 is 0. But how about if it's 2? Well, we have here that 2 squared is 4, 3 times 4 is 12, and x is 2 here, so this is 12. And this checks. So through the method of putting it in standard form, where we equal our quadratic equation to 0, factor it, which is what we did here, put it in standard form, factored it, we got our solution. And there we are. Now, for this one, I don't know if you recognize this, but this is a perfect square trinomial that will look like so. X minus 4, the quantity squared, equals 0. So for something like this, we want to write it twice, in a sense. Now again, this is our A, and our B happens to be the same, but the technique will be the same. So we get x minus 4 equals 0, or x minus 4 equals 0. We're getting two the same. So here, x equals 4, x equals 4. When we have that the root, the solutions are the same, we only need to write it once. Now, theoretically, when you have a quadratic equation, you're going to get two solutions. The power of your equation, the degree of it, tells you how many solutions you should have. But here the solutions are the same. And they're telling us for a double solution, we only write it once. Okay, let's take a look at this one. Now, notice, is it in standard form? And the answer is no. So what do you need to do? Put it in standard form. So 4x squared minus 4x, transpose the 24, negative 24, equals 0. Now notice you can divide everything by 4 here to simplify that, or factor out of 4, either way. Here this becomes x squared minus x minus 6 equals 0. So we're using some of the skills we've brought into this section, and now we want to factor this. And generally these aren't that difficult to factor. Remember, this will be our A and this is our B. X, 3, 2. We need a negative in the middle, so this will be negative and this will be positive. And again, this is the work we want to see on your blue sheets. So we always want to be able to give you partial credit. But better if you get it right. So this will be x plus 2 equals 0, or x minus 3 equals 0. So here x equals a negative 2, x equals a negative, or I should say, a positive now, positive 3. We had to transpose that. I was distracted a little here. Okay, that looks good. So I'm saving a little time by not showing all of these as they do, but you get to see how they show the answer, and it's just transposing to get opposite signs here. And be careful. Okay, now here is something we did a little earlier, and let's look at this in some detail. This is not in standard form, so we'll put it in standard form. X plus 5, the quantity squared, minus 36. And now this equals 0. Well, we had one like this as our special products, because this is like a squared minus b squared, where we're going to factor these into their conjugates. So let's do that carefully. This will be x plus 5 plus 6 here, and this is x plus 5 minus 6 equals 0. We did one like this. So again, this is going, the conjugates are a plus b, a minus b. So this is our a squared and this is our b squared. So when we take the square root of 36, we get the 6's here. One's a plus, one's a minus, and then there's our a plus b, a minus b. So we do a little bit of addition here. We get x plus 11 now, plus 6 plus 6 equals 0. x minus 1, and that equals 0. So the next step is x plus 11 equals 0, or x minus 1 equals 0. So here x equals a negative 11, here x equals 1. So again, a little bit challenging, but hopefully through this repetition and showing what's going on, it's going to be helpful. Now in this case, they're showing us a little different way, which works as well. So they're bringing the 36, after they've expanded this binomial into this perfect square trinomial, bringing the 36 over, adding it as a negative 36, adding it to the 25, and you get this, and then they're factoring it from this. That is a legitimate way to do it as well. Okay. And the answers are the same. Okay, how about something like this? Well, again, the rule is to put it in standard form. So get rid of the parentheses. So this is going to be 3x squared minus 3x equals 10 minus 2x. The rule is put it in standard form. We have to bring everything over to this side. So 3x squared. Now when we bring this term over to this side, this negative 2x becomes a positive 2x. So this is just going to be a negative x. And our 10 comes over as a negative 10. And this equals 0. Now we have it in standard form. So we need to factor that. So I worked with it a little bit. Got my parentheses. This is prime, so it's going to be a 3x and a 3x. Then I had to work with the 10 a little bit. And I knew it wasn't going to be a 10 and a 1. So I tried a 5 and a 2 and a 2 and a 5. And I had to get something that has a 1 here for this middle term. So when I do my outers, I get a 6. My inners, I get a 5. So this is the factorization. Now what would the signs be? Well, I need a negative in the middle. So my larger, the 6, has to be the negative, and this is the positive. So now I equate each of these factors. Remember, this is a times b equals 0. And this is going to be 3x plus 5 equals 0. Or x minus 2 equals 0. So this is, bring the 5 over as a negative 5. And then divide both sides by 3. I get x equals a negative 5/3. Or x equals 2. Alright, so a little bit tedious, but not too bad. Just takes time, step by step, show your work, and this is what we get. So to save a little time, I've written this here. The rule from our solving equations, get rid of fractions. So we're going to multiply each term by 15. So 15 goes into there nicely. 3 will go into there once. 3 will go into there 5 times. 3 goes into there once. 5 goes into there once. 5 goes into there 3 times. So now we have 2x squared minus 5x. And I'm going to bring this negative 3 over to this side. I'll put a 0 there. Bring this negative 3 on this side. It becomes a positive 3. So now I need to factor that. So to save a little time, we got all the way to here, brought that negative 3 over as a positive 3, and now we had to factor this. So as we put up our parentheses, we got a 2x and an x, and then we had to have factors of 3 so that our middle term was a negative 5x. So I put the 3 there and the 1 there. Now they have to be the same signs, so I end up with a positive 3 there. So in order to get a negative 5, I had to have both of these. So when I did my outers, I got a negative 2x, my inners a negative 3x that added up to this. So now that as I do my next step, I'm going to say 2x minus 3 equals 0, and or x minus 1 equals 0. So I bring this over as a 3, and I divide by 2, and I get x equals 2/3, or here x equals a 1. So these are my solutions, and I guess we can just show that to you here as we get to the next slide. And they're working it out in detail, and there are solutions. Okay, now we get one to a little higher degree. We're running over our 20 minutes, but there's not too much more, so we'll just keep going to finish this up here. So in solving this, we want to see what we can factor out. And this is to the 3rd degree. So we can factor out a 2x out of each term. And then this becomes x squared minus 2x minus 3 equals 0. So we get 2x, and then we're going to factor this. And then they're not too difficult to factor here. The 3 will be a negative, this will be a positive. Now to save a little time, I'm going to equal this way. Just equal each of these factors to 0. And here, this is going to be x equals 0. Here, this is going to be x equals a negative 1. And here, this is going to be x equals a 3. So I'm saving a little time. We've done some of this before, and we're just to keep it not too long here. And we'll show it to you. So they factored out your 2x, factored the trinomial, equal each of them to 0, and then there are your solutions. Now, in an equation that's to the 3rd degree, you should have 3 solutions, and they do. Don't forget about this 2x equals 0, which is 0. And they all make them correct. Now, for the last part, and by the way, remember you can never solve these by doing this, because to solve this, it must be in standard form. This is incorrect to do it this way. You have to have factors equals 0. That's a common error. Okay, let's go on here. Now, they're giving us, this is our last example, they're giving us the two solutions. What would the equation have been from this? Well, we'll start here. We know that this came from x minus 3 equals 0, right? We're going to bring that 3 over to this side as a negative 3. And then this was, let's see here. This 3 went by the x, so this one was 3x. And this is a negative 2, came over here as a positive 2, equals 0. So this 3, when we solve this, the 2 came over as a negative 2, and we divided it by 3, and we got this. So this becomes this. Now, once we've done that, it's just a matter of x minus 3, 3x plus 2 equals 0. And now we just FOIL this. So this will be 3x squared. Now my inners are a negative 9 plus 2, a negative 7x. And then negative 3 times 2 is a negative 6 equals 0, and there's my equation. Now I made this a little short. We'll take a look at what the book is doing too. So again, this goes over and becomes this. This, we rewrite this on this side equals 0. But we're going to multiply everything by that, and it becomes this. I like the way I did it a little better. And then we have our factors that we FOIL, and then there's our solution. Okay, so this really ran over, and there are some practice ones if you want, and then these are the answers. Okay, well, good luck on your test.